everybody, and thanks for having me tonight. It's nice to get out and talk about the animals that I love to work with. I'm the Regional Marine Mammal Response Program Coordinator for NOAA Fishery Service, and basically I always say about 80% of my job is Hawaiian monk seal response and recovery, and the other 20% is somewhere within landings and disentanglement work. So you may have heard that PWF announced that the first Pacific Whale Foundation announced that humpback whales has already occurred this season. So they're coming. So that means the beginning of our whale season. So we're getting ready for that as well. How many of you have been here to hear about heard of monks before in the past? So quite a few of you. About maybe a different side of monk seals that you're not used to hearing about. And it's basically, the title is When Good Seals Develop Bad Habits, or being more politically correct, because that's the kind of time and day that we're in, and we want to give a little more credit to the seals. So there are no bad seals, just seals that make poor choices, right? That's kind of like the motto of the school teacher. And really, to go beyond that, seals actually that are making the bad choices you talk about are mostly related to the fact that we're acting irresponsibly around these impressionable marine mammals, and then they become where they develop undesirable behaviors, be aggressive. And so it always points back to us, doesn't it? And the way that we interment, and it really comes back to us in that maybe to play with a baby seal or make eye contact or feed it, we have to keep them wild. And so this verse, does anybody know who there? That's the famous Kaimana. That's a good guess. I mean, if you're just, Kaimana is the answer to everything, right? But anyway, so she was, as you know, she was down in Waikiki, and she did things like go into the natatorium, and I have a picture here of her. She's already developed because again, she's a product of her environment. So there's all these things to kind of get into. There's the natatorium, there's people's slippas, and that was one of the reasons why we decided to the North Shore. But since then, she's actually been hooked, interacted with 2 fishing lures and 2 different fishing hook setups. So she's been hooked 4 times since, hey, let's take her out to the country, get her away from the craziness, she'll behave. She's not behaving. So anyway, that's Imana. But anyway, one of the rules of giving a presentation like this is don't read from your slide, but I'm going to do it anyway. So just to kind of give you the setting, I'm going to read the abstract. So let sleeping seals leave seals be, keep seals safe and wild. You might be familiar with these and other similar phrases regarding human interaction with wildlife, like don't feed the bears in Yellowstone. Learn why these messages are so important and why we want to avoid habituated seals. A habituated seal can be perceived as a human safety risk, labeled as a problem seal, and potentially have to be removed from the wild. It is the responsibility of all of us to avoid this, and I lost my spot, to avoid interacting with seals, especially young seals, so they develop into normal wild seals and don't pose this public safety risk. The recovery of the endangered Hawaiian monk seal species is dependent on seals surviving to adulthood and successfully reproducing. If a potentially dangerous problem seal has to be removed from the natural habitat because it's too friendly or too aggressive, this will hinder recovery of the species. This talk will discuss these behavioral processes, the outreach challenges as it relates to 3 case studies, and Ho'ailona, and then we'll talk most recently about the Hiko outflow, Kahi outflow power plant. So I'm going to talk about those seals that, because of their situations, have not done very well. But I thought I would first start to talk about the risks. What's that?
Sorry, there's a giant spider right by me.
Okay. All right. It's climbing up that person's leg. It's okay. So anyway, getting back to monk seals, megafauna. Yeah, so we we have various issues with marine mammals in the main Hawaiian Islands. Issues like swimming with spinner dolphins is a management issue. We also have concerns about interactions with monk seals. You can see a busy beach there at White Plains. You see a fishing lure stuck to a seal's back. You see a seal out by Kualoa Ranch area in a narrow strand of beach. We've actually had seals climb up onto roadways. And I just put the picture with the rooster and the seal. That's not really a threat, but it just seemed like maybe it would be someday. I don't know. I just thought it was a cool picture, so I had to put it in there. We've had hookings of monk seals, which that's pretty common, and we have teams of people working with. I know there's a couple Hawaii Marine Animal Response volunteers in the audience. Please raise your hands. These are some of the folks that are our eyes. Yeah, let's give them a big hand. They're our eyes and ears, and we usually hear about the hook seals from them. And then a NOAA team and a veterinarian sometimes will run out, and in most cases we can dehook the seal. The other situations of entangled seals that didn't make it, and so gill nets are a big threat and a concern to us for monk seal recovery. And then probably the one that you've heard the most press about recently, and it is really something that is a growing problem that really needs to be addressed at the state legislature level. And I encourage all of you to get engaged in this issue because it's not just a monk seal and wild bird issue. We've had toxo in spinner dolphins, and the feral cats also affect wild bird populations, native bird populations. So this is a big issue. It's now become, toxoplasmosis in monk seals has now become a major threat on our kind of major threat list. And so there's a lot of concern for this. And if you want more information on that, we have these fact sheets that talk about the life cycle of toxoplasmosis from the cat feces into the environment and then out to monk seals. But what we're really here to talk about today are threats in the form of monk seals that have become too friendly and again turn into these problem seals. And so this was a seal back in the early 2000s that was nicknamed Humpy. And you can see that picture to the right is that adequate name. There's not too many young kids here, so I think we're okay. But cover their ears, Aaron. Anyway, this seal would be seen having its amorous advances towards swimmers, and was a problem for a little while, but that behavior luckily seemed to extinguish on its own. A different seal that I'll talk to you about was a seal that has a very long saga and actually caused the taxpayer a lot of money in the management of this individual seal. But this seal is kind of the textbook of what happens with these seals and how they evolve into these habituated and conditioned seals. So you can see the mom and the pup. That's a tiny little pup next to a mom in a real small pocket beach called Papaiko on the Big Island. And the beach was very, very tiny, probably about 10% of Hanauma Bay beachfront. This was a little tiny bay. So basically you had a baby who was born on a popular beach from day one. And as soon as it could understand its surroundings, it was seeing high volumes of people. This was a favorite spot for picnicking and surfing. And again, it was close quarters. So basically the seal was exposed to people very early on. We realized that was a difficult place for that seal to grow up. So we tried to prevent any human interaction, but it was kind of too late. So we moved the pup out of that area, moved it to a remote location. But then we started getting reports of this seal, unidentified seal, that was poking people's swim fins and looking up at people's cameras you see in the lower left, and being very attentive towards people. And you just look at the eyes of that seal in the right-hand picture, and I don't know, there's just something a little different about that seal. I'll leave you to the interpretation. So then the seal shows up at this area called Mahu Kona on the Big Island, which is it was a very popular place, and it had this pier that people could jump off of, and people would bring their boats there, and you could have a couple hundred people in this little small area on a weekend drinking beer and having fun and doing what it is that people do on weekends. And the seal was just eating it all up. And people would also routinely go there to do their morning laps, swim laps. And at first people were like, oh, this is great. And you can see somebody's petting the seal. Another guy's trying to get out of the water. The guy in the lower left is actually feeding the seal, thinking, well, I'm gonna pay the tax man, is what we hear, is that, the seal kind of let me do my fishing, but now it's time for me to get out of the water. I'm gonna pay the seal off and give him some fish. And that's, of course, the worst thing that you can do. One or two fish or three fish is in some cases enough to reinforce or associate the seal with people. And the unfortunate thing about this was when we first went down there, I went down there with a colleague of mine from the Big Island and tried to do outreach, and we tried to be as polite as possible. And we said, please don't play with the seal. He's cute now. He's cute now because he only weighs 100 pounds, but when he gets bigger, he's going to be a problem. And when he has his sexual hormones going, he's going to be a problem. And so, true to form, they kind of said, don't tell us how to manage our seal. We know how to deal with our wildlife. Go away, NOAA. So we went away, and then fast forward about 6 months when the seal is getting bigger and the sexual hormones are kicking in. You see the guy up in the left. The guy up in the left has done swimming his laps. He's tired. He wants to get out of the water, but the seal's not having it. The seal's being demanding of behavior and literally won't let the guy get out of the water. I have video that I couldn't find it for tonight, but actually the seal was like juggling people in the water like a water polo ball or a soccer ball, kind of like dribbling back and forth like, I'm not going to let you out. So that's kind of scary. If you're tired and you want to get out of the water and the seal doesn't want to let you out, that can be a problem. So the history was we moved it from Papaiko to Lighthouse, and then Kapanaya to Lapakahi, and then Mahukona after all of that to Keaho, and then from Ho'okana Big Island to the waters off of Lau Point. So this animal had frequent flyer miles with the United States Coast Guard, as well as first class on Coast Guard cutters, and probably one of the most traveled seals in history. And it's not over yet. So this was us taking it and trying to release it off of Volcano National Park where there were no people. And we put a satellite tag on it, and it quickly went from volcanoes around to Milili'i and discovered this community in Milili'i and became basically the mascot or amakua of this community. Hung out there for a while, which was good, but then got into these behaviors of pulling people underwater. Was seen by an aerial survey, and then we took it by vessel and released it off of Lau Point from the Big Island, where it then went over to the island of Lanai and was hanging out in parking lots and kind of being a punk in parking lots. So yeah, this seal pretty much made it to all the main Hawaiian Islands, and wherever it went, it kind of wreaked havoc. And so you're asking, why is there a picture of Captain Kirk in my slideshow? Did anybody ever watch the TV late night talk show, Late Night with Craig Ferguson?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that one? Okay. So one night I'm watching Craig Ferguson late at night, which I hardly ever do, and William Shatner's on there, and he starts saying, I got to tell you about this trip I had to Hawaii and this seal, and he gets Craig Ferguson to stand up behind him. So William Shatner's there, Craig Ferguson's behind. He's like, put your arms around me. That's what the seal was doing. So basically, William Shatner, Captain Kirk, had an intimate encounter with O-42. And so from that, after that encounter, after making it to Hollywood and national news, we sat down and we talked about, okay, well, what are the options for this seal? There could be captivity or in an aquarium setting for the rest of its life. Other areas in the main Hawaiian Islands, gosh, we had already moved it to most of the main islands. Johnston Atoll, which was kind of like sending it to Alcatraz, there's no other seals out there. That seemed kind of cruel, so we didn't do that. And then released to Nihoa with the U.S. Coast Guard standby. So we actually caught the animal. Again, this animal cost the taxpayer a lot of money. But I will say that, I say that jokingly, whenever the Coast Guard does a boat ride for us or a boat transport or surveillance or uses a C-130, they're doing that under training hours anyway. So they could either be flying around with nothing in the plane pretending it's a medevac, or they could have a seal in the plane and pretend it's a medevac. So it's a little bit more real, but it's not quite real. So anyway, we transported the animal from Lanai where it had recently accosted Captain Kirk. And we brought it to Oahu, and then we stuck it in a shoreline pen at the Marine Corps base until the Coast Guard was ready to take us up on a buoy tender. So the Coast Guard had to go up to the Northwest Islands to set some buoys anyway. So we tagged along. So there's all those big buoys and that big crate. And you see that tiny little crate in the top there, that thin white thing, and then a utility boat, and then those huge buoys. I never realized how big they were. But we were in some rough seas, and those buoys came loose and started rolling around. And we were like, oh, and it's not like you can like stop everything, right? Because you're in 12, 15-foot seas. And so finally the seas calmed down and we're able to, well, I wasn't, but the Coast Guard guys secured the buoys and we were fine. But we would go down there and check on 042 every once in a while. And there she is. And then finally, so if you know the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, Nihoa is the first in what we call the Northwesterns after Ni'ihau, Kauai and Ni'ihau. And so that was the quickest boat ride. And that's, Ni'ihau is basically a big rock coming out of the ocean. And there are seals that spend some time there. And our field researchers do spend time when they can get on land, when the sea state is right, they will try to survey and tag seals, but it's very treacherous. And so on this day, because of the weather, we could not drive her to shore. So we kind of had to just slide her off the deck of the ship. And so we let her go and she had a satellite tag. And then here's some of her movements. And basically she made it around Nihoa, made it onto land, did a lot of this deep ocean diving on seamounts, which we think is a good thing that she was finding food. But basically we were concerned that she would find her way back to Kauai somehow. And basically in the short time that we tracked her, I think it was about 2 weeks, the distance traveled in the water, she could have gone back and forth to Kauai 2.5 times, but she didn't. So that was good. Now we hadn't seen her since, and some say, well, maybe she didn't make it, or some say that she's just eluding field campers, but it's been almost, I think, 8 years or so now. So I'm starting to maybe be a little pessimistic that she didn't make it, but who knows? She could maybe at some point in time show up back again. So, socialized monk seals, how does it start? So we have that seal Humpy, we have 042. There's a couple other examples. Basically, we have, in the main islands here, it's good that the monk seals are recovering and doing well, and they seem to be doing especially well in the main islands. They're bigger. The moms stay with them longer at the time of rearing. The pups are bigger at weaning, and that's all great. But you have more of a chance with the fact that we have, almost 2 million people here across the main islands, that they could interact with people. You have the process of desensitization, habituation, provisioning, which is feeding, and then true conditioning. And then you have problem animals. So I thought I would kind of demonstrate this. The first part of my job, first thing I started off in my career was actually as a marine mammal trainer. So I was a dolphin trainer. That's what I wanted to do when I was a kid. And here I am a monk seal manager. But I thought maybe I could have somebody help me demonstrate some of these behavioral concepts. And so I've already picked on Chemo to come up here and help me. So come on up here, brother. Let's give Chemo a big hand. So let's pretend that Chemo is a seal. And stand right here because I got to stay by the microphone. And that we have reinforcement. And so reinforcement can be fish. Reinforcement can be attention. It can be petting. It can be simple as eye contact, right? That's eye contact. So let's talk about some of these behavioral properties. So what if I do this to you? You're going to poke me back. But yeah, this may not work. So the idea is that if I poke him, initially he's going to respond. And yeah, he might poke me back or bite me. But at some point, if I'm poking him enough, he's going to be like, you know what? I'm on a beach. I'm getting reinforced for getting poked. And so it's not that bad. It's not such a bad thing. It's such a, so see, now we have a desensitized seal. So actually now he's actually gone from desensitized. So desensitized is, okay, he really doesn't care as much as he did before. Initially, he was like, I'm going to bite him. I'm going to move. And then desensitization is, you know what? I'm going to put up with you. You're not so bad. And then conditioning is when when the behavior turns towards me like that.
Oh, I'm not gonna go behind you.
Don't go behind. But if it comes towards me where he's like seeking out the reinforcement, then that's a conditioned seal. I mean, we may as well just take him and put him at Sea Life Park or SeaWorld because he's like a trained seal. So that's basically what I'm talking about desensitization, habituation, and conditioning. So thank you. You can go to your seat. Thank you for being here. So if you think about it, in comparison to, say, the work that some of our teams do in the Northwest Islands, who deal with pretty much predominantly very wild seals that don't have too much human experience. I mean, they do have the field camp staff that I work with go up there, and they may get a seal and restrain it and tag it, or they may vaccinate it, which isn't very nice, with a needle, real quick poke in the butt with the needle. But for the most part, they are much more wild than, say, the main Hawaiian Islands animals. I would say that most, if not all, of our main islands animals are in this, they're definitely desensitized, and a lot of them are habituated. Again, look at Rocky, Kaimana's mom. Before Rocky was famous for having Kaimana, she used to spend a lot of time in Waikiki Beach, hence the reason why she had a pup there. But, we would get calls in the middle of the night going years back from the MPs at Fort DeRussy saying Rocky is laying right up against the tiki bar and the music's going and people are drunk and Rocky doesn't care. I mean, that is a habituated seal. Okay. That is kind of beyond habituated. And then you see seals at Sandy's Beach and things like that. And so we definitely have a lot of habituated seals. The trick is to keep them wild so they don't jump over into the conditioned seal and become a problem animal. Do you want to try to show this? So I just wanted to, this isn't, again, I'm not trying to scare you guys. I gotta stay here. I'm not trying to scare you guys, but seals are big. And just like anything else in the animal kingdom, if you get between a mom and a baby of anything, animals that normally wouldn't necessarily display with a lot of aggression can be aggressive, and monk seals can be pretty quick. You mostly see them lying on the beach and not moving too fast, but this was Rocky and Kaimana in the early days. Kaimana's just a little tiny kid there, but you can see that when Rocky gets agitated, she can come pretty quickly. And when we've had people attacked by monk seals, it's been in mom and pup situations. And again, this can also be, the next step is maybe not just the mom and pup interaction or the mom defending the pup, but if you have an animal that has been habituated or conditioned and is demanding of reinforcement, again, these animals can move quick and are big, 300, 400, 500 pounds, and they have the potential to cause problems. And so 042 was actually nibbling on on the top of their head. Scuba divers, she would go up behind them and nibble with her teeth. And you could, divers explained feeling the presence of teeth on their head and a little bit of pressure. So that's not something that we want to reinforce. And so, again, I just wanted to, we all love Rocky and Kaimana, so why not show another video of them? And I think we can go back to the slideshow. That's just, there was a different video of Rocky when I think it was Kaiwi came by, and she made a beeline towards Kaiwi and in no time flat, so that can happen. And this, again, is just kind of my first love, again, is behavior and my kind of marine mammal training side of me. And so this is just kind of breaking it down, and actually the slide's kind of messed up, but so basically, to try to follow this slide, it's just kind of the behavioral explanation of how these seals evolve into, quote, undesirable behavior. So you have birth and weaning, and then weaning is after mom rears it, it's weaned, and it's on its own. And then there's this social development, and then there's sexual development, which is the sexual hormone thing, and then there's adulthood. And it seems like most of these seals will develop their undesirable behaviors in the earlier part of, post-weaning and into social development. And so one of the things we'll tell our Hawaii Marine Animal Response Volunteer Network partners is that it's great that they do the babysitting of the mom-pup pairs, but the time for the real vigilance and and the real stewardship over managing that situation is after mom leaves and that month or maybe 2 months post weaning, because that's when the pup has gained a lot of weight, doesn't really need to forage. And the old saying that my grandmother used to say, idle hands are the devil's workshop. Basically the baby it's not hungry, it's big and healthy, doesn't need to forage. And so it's just gonna kind of sit around and wait for trouble to find it. And that's what we have there. So that's when we want to keep them wild. And that's when some of these conditions heal. So they can either go on a trajectory of normal behavioral development, which is the one to the right, or if these different reinforcers are happening over time with human contact, you can develop into these behavioral problem animals. And so moving on to a little bit of a different case, because this was a little bit more human influence than, say, 042, who was a wild seal. This is the story of Hawai'i or KP2. And this was the scene that I was confronted with when I went down on the beach. This was back, when was this, 2009 or so? I went down on the beach and there was this little baby seal that was vocalizing with mom nowhere to be found. This big black rock to the right there, right before this picture was taken, this little seal had its flippers stretched out and was trying to nurse from the rock. And so you heard this suckling sound on the wet rock, and you heard the little flippers slapping against the wet rock, and then you would hear vocalizing. So, literally the getting blood from a stone. It's not going to happen. So it was very heartbreaking, all that big awl that you guys did. We all did that. We tried to take KP2 and put him back to his mother, and she had already abandoned the pup and was out following and frolicking with a male. So she was, babies having babies, teens having kids, that kind of a thing. She had dumped her kid and was out frolicking around. So not a good mom. And when we tried to reintroduce her to her mom, the mom was at the stage where that affiliation, whatever it is that shuts off, had shut off, and she did not recognize it. And that's the picture with the mouth open over the pup. And right after this picture, she bit down on the head and threw the pup down the beach. At which time, Sean Fari and I, that's up in the upper left-hand corner, we were standing there watching, and we're like, just like you guys did. And we went running down there towards the beach, and Sean Fari, one of the seasoned field researchers, made a funny comment of like, ma'am, we're from Child Protective Services. You've now lost custody of your baby. So he's saying this as we're sprinting towards the pup. And we picked it up kind of rugby ball style, brought it back, put it on the cage, gave it some IV fluids, and decided that after watching this for 24 hours of abandonment and then several attempts of reintroduction with the mom actually being aggressive, that last one, we said that's enough. And the Coast Guard luckily was standing by, and that's us taking KP2. There's KP2 in the early days, just a little bag of bones. This is KP2 with a little bit more meat on his bones at Koala Basin being rehabilitated. And at this point in time, we didn't know a lot about rehabbing monk seals. Nobody had done one successfully before from, like a day old. They had done it with weaned pups that were undersized, but never this young. And so it was in a pool situation. We realized that he really started to get conditioned to people when the door would open and close in the morning, when people would come and start putting lights on, and when the blender went off to make his fish milkshake, he would exhibit different behaviors. And so when you're doing rehab, those are the kinds of things that are very difficult, because no matter what you do, if you're in the animal's environment at that impressionable age, they become conditioned. And so we went back to that pen situation that we had with 042 at the Marine Corps base, and we put him in the pen there. And that's all the volunteers at the time that helped erect the structure. And he was doing well there. We had to do some restraint for some medical. We had put a satellite tag on him, getting ready for release, obviously put on a bunch of weight. This is a pretty cool story. We had local fishermen that agreed to go out and catch live taco for KP2, and he would have a great time with them and play with them, trying to get him, used to not eating the dead fish that we were feeding, but for some live stuff as well. The other cool thing that he would do is he would actually go around his pen and pick up rocks and then stack the rocks in a pile to create habitat. And then fish would come in and use the habitat. And then he would go over and knock the habitat over and all the fish would go flying everywhere. So pretty interesting tool use, yeah, in a marine mammal. So smart critter, but so he was finally released, flown from here on Oahu to Molokai. We took him to Kalapapa, where he landed. The others are our buddies at Kalapapa. Let him go in a pretty pristine environment with the tag, watched over him, living the life in Kalapapa. You could see that, we had given him this chance and we knew that he had these corneal opacities. So you see those cloudiness in his eyes. And we thought we would give him a chance in the wild to see if that would be, if we could heal that. And he did well, and with satellite tracking, showed that he could move great distance around the north shore of Kalapapa. But then where am I? But then he discovered, those are all of his tracking points. So he went all over the place, but then discovered Kaunakakai Pier, and then things went really bad. And so KP2 was later nicknamed Ho'ailona, which means sign. And the good thing about it is people really began to adopt this seal, and they started to say things like, well, if you think about it, Hawaiian monk seals are dwindling in numbers and they're suffering from a lot of threats and they're kind of oppressed. And I've had Hawaiian elders tell me that they were starting to draw that connection between how we treat Hawaiian monk seals is how we can expect the Hawaiian people to be treated, and that we have to conserve both, and making that connection. And that was great. However, this little seal who had been reared in captivity, so again, different than just growing up in the wild while people were, we were kind of to blame, because even though we tried really hard, he was raised in a captive situation. And he basically took over Kaunakakai Pier. He became the mascot. People, again, were swimming with the seal. Same kind of scenario where we said, please don't swim with the seal. He's going to become a behavioral issue if we do. And we were again told, don't tell us how to act around our seal. And then months later, when he became aggressive and wouldn't let people out of the water, we said, we got to come and take this seal. And there was kind of a battle between NOAA Fisheries and the Molokai community. I kind of hesitate to point you to this book, but I guess I will. There's a book called The Odyssey of KP2. It's a book that is very highly sensationalized about this event, but it does portray like the timeline of things, but other than that, it's kind of garbage. But if you want to read it, it still talks about monk seals. So I guess since you all like monk seals, it's a book you might want to read. But anyway, there's some lessons learned in that book. But anyway, I keep hitting the wrong thing. So this is KP2 in his heyday, or Ho'ailona, in the lineup. This picture is entitled "In the Lineup," with his surfing buddies. And there's videos of him doing water ballet with a golden retriever, and there's all kinds of interactions between this seal and the public. And we started a project called an adversive conditioning project. So kind of when we talk about those different stages of desensitization, habituation, conditioning, in some cases you can counter condition or use aversive conditioning to get seals to stop those learned behaviors. And we tried things, it doesn't sound very nice, but like slapping palm fronds with the water and actually chasing him into the water off of the boat ramp. Because of this particular seal, we actually say that any seal that comes up on a boat ramp is a no-go zone and has to be chased off that boat ramp. Susie and I chased off Rocky, right? It was Rocky? Chased off Rocky about a month ago, or a couple weeks ago. September 14th. Okay then, September 14th. That was, about a month ago. So we will use aversive conditioning to get animals off boat ramps, to get seals off roadways, and we're even looking at other types of things to aversively condition monk seals. In the Pacific Northwest, we're not close to this, but in the Pacific Northwest, where they've had problems with sea lions in the salmon runs, they actually have gotten to the point where they'll shoot the sea lions with rubber bullets. And that actually will deter the sea lions for just a little while, but the reinforcement of all that salmon coming back is enough to have them come back even when getting shot by rubber bullets. So the point being is that once these animals develop these behaviors, it's really hard to counter condition or decondition that. And we learned that with KP2 and the palm fronds. After a while, that's Val Bloy, one of our seasoned volunteers. It's now in Kauai. The seal would just kind of look up at her like, what? You with the palm fronds again? So anyway, there's Hawaii Lona, the happy ending. So the seal resides at the Waikiki Aquarium. He is 80% without vision. He taught us a lot about conditioning. He taught us a lot about community relations. He taught us a lot of things. And he is an ambassador for our seal. But again, as I said in the beginning, any seal that can't survive in the wild because of our human behavior is one less seal in the population of 1,400 that we need out there. Now, we jokingly say, or maybe not even jokingly, but in our little management realm as the monk seal managers, we always talk about how much more important the females are than the males. And the fact that he's a male and he's in an aquarium setting isn't so bad because it doesn't have the potential to produce or contribute to the population, like say a 5AY or Rocky. Those seals have had 10, 12 pups, right? So the males can't hold a candle to that. And so it's a little less of a problem with the fact that it's a male, but still we want to keep the animals out in the wild. So fast forward to our current problem. So both of those were, one case we had to take a seal, literally voted off the island, right? And taken it to the Northwest Islands where they don't do as well. And then in another case, the seal had to go into captivity or an aquarium setting. Our current day situation is one at the Kahe power plant, the Hiko power plant. So up there on the way to Waianae before Nanakuli, you have this man-made cove area, and it's a outflow for the electric plant. And of course, we all need electric, so that's a good thing. But what this power plant has done in function by having this warm water outflow has attracted bait fish. And so there's all these bait fish attracted there. And over the years, it's attracted some seals, but not as a seal's kind of sole source of existence. And so fast forward to, I keep doing that. I'm going to get that by the end. Fast forward to this seal, RH32, which has been spending a little more time there than most of the other seals over the years. And it has been a situation where we're concerned about this seal's health. The seal has now been hooked at least 3 or 4 times that we know of, and maybe more. We recently caught the seal over near Kayana Point and removed a superficial hook, a larger hook from its mouth, the outer area. And then we're able to identify that there's some real small damashi hooks that are in the stomach that were not something that we would do surgery on, and something that could either dissolve or pass through the animal. In cases past, some of you may know that we've had seals that have swallowed those big circle hooks that are as big as the palm of my hand, and we have to actually do surgery or go in with endoscope. And so remove the one hook, deem the other one's not critical, but on any given day, there's between 10 and 35 fishermen at that little cove area, starting from about 5:30 in the morning until about 9 in the morning. And people are just bailing the akule. I mean, as fast as you can count them, people are pulling them in, guys are pulling them in. And so this seal's had quite a few interactions. And this was a time back in May where we could just see that swivel, but we couldn't see a big hook. And so part of what we'll do under our permit is we'll intentionally go out and disturb a seal. So this is illegal for the general public to do, but with our permit, we're allowed to go out and go boo boo to the seal to get it to react, to be able to look in its mouth. And from that, we thought we saw a really tiny fish hook. So we thought, well, that's one of those damashi hooks. So we won't catch the seal and bring it in at that point in time. Or no, actually, we wanted to catch the seal, but it hadn't presented itself in the right place, because our protocols say we can only catch on loose sand or safe areas, and these rocky areas are too difficult. And of course, that's where this animal has been going to to rest and recreate. And so it's not been in catchable locations in a lot of cases, but we're able to visualize by temporarily harassing the seal to see where the hook is. And then these are just some shots recently of, that's a guy pulling in his fish and the seal taking its attention from the bait ball to the fish that's being caught. There's actually a fish that's been caught. You can see the line coming back towards shore. And, so the seal is, most of the time, it's working the bait ball. It's down there. It's got all these fish to feed from. And it really doesn't need to depredate on the fisherman's caught fish. It's only when, if the fishermen are kind of reeling it in slowly and the fish is doing all this, it's kind of like a dog with a stuffed sock, like, hey, and he gets excited. You can see him getting excited. So there's another one. There's no hooking here, but the hook is there, and then there's the fish, and it's very close to hooking. Here that you see the seal actually coming up out of the water towards the fisherman, what the fisherman just caught. Here's a nice sized fish that was caught, but by the time the guy could get it in, it was maimed. So obviously fishermen are in some cases not very happy about this. So, and then, the face of the guilty. So anyway, RH32, how old is he? 2 years old? Yeah, 2 years old, yeah. So this is again within that time frame of impressionable seals. So again, we've had seals in that area before, but they haven't made it as much of a habit as this seal has. And again, it's because it's in that time frame. So those are just a couple examples of some of the management challenges we have with behavioral problem seals, and we just ask that you help us get the message out that we need to keep them wild, so that we don't have to bother the Coast Guard to fly them all over the place, among other things. We want them to stay healthy and in the population. So I'll take your questions at this time. Go ahead.
So I volunteer at Hanauma Bay, and we've had an unprecedented number of monk seals coming in almost daily, 1 or 2, sometimes 3. Do you have any explanation for why that all of a sudden is happening? It
could just be following bait. They're following food this time of the year. It could be that. I don't know. Is anybody are any of them molting here? Not? Are they done molting or? Yeah. Sometimes the seals will come in here to molt. Yeah. So in the past, historically, seals have used Hanauma Bay to molt. So you might see an increase there. But we have on each one of the islands. On Oahu, we have about 35 to 40 what we consider resident seals. They'll travel inner island, but for the most part, we have about 35 to 40 seals here. And so they'll use different parts of the island at different times. And so they might be here for a while. And then maybe we'll see them in Waikiki in a couple of weeks. It's hard to say. I mean, Susie and some folks in here track them daily. Do you want to comment on any more about that? Not really? Okay, all right. Good enough. Yeah.
How is Kaimana doing?
How is Kaimana doing? Well, besides after being relocated, translocated, being hooked 4 times, and there was a time when the seal was seen circling stand-up paddleboard surfers out there up on the North Shore, but I haven't heard anything in a while, so I'm assuming kind of no news is good news. Have you heard anything, Susie? Yep. So seems to be behaving itself.
Why do we call them monk seals?
Why do we call them monk seals? I've heard 2 theories. One is that one picture where the seal was kind of up and had its face forward. Some have said that when they have a thicker, when they're kind of a little heavier, that it looks like a cowl from like a robe from a monk, and then that bald head. To someone at some point in time, they looked like a monk. I don't know. It's kind of like sea mariners that said manatees looked like mermaids. I mean, you must have been at sea a really long time if you think that was like a monk. So who knows? But and then the other idea is that if you compare them to other pinniped species, other seal species, they're more solitary than not. Like if you go to California, you see the sea lions on Pier 38 just all stacked on top of each other. These seals tend to be a little bit separate from each other. Now, it doesn't really hold true. If you look at Larson's Beach on Kauai, there's a bunch of them. And on the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, you can see them kind of clumped together. But again, they're not really like laying on top of each other like you see in these big rookeries. The other example is like harbor seals on the East Coast. You can just see them piled on beaches for miles. Yes.
So I've heard the number 1,200, 1,400,
Yeah.
you know. When are these counts occurring so that we actually know how many there are? And my second question is, are they all up at the Northwest Hawaiian Islands if there's only like 35 down here in the main Hawaiian Islands?
There's 35 on Oahu. Yeah, 30. So there's about maybe around 300 in the main islands. So from Ni'ihau west to the Big Island is about 300 animals. And then the other 1,100 or so is up in the Northwest. And that's been about the ratio. Yeah, I've been in this job for 13 years, and they dipped down as low as near 1,100, and we're at 1,200 for a while. And then they did a census just last year and came up with a number of 1,400 and some change. It was 1,400 and a little more than that. And it's based on what we know of what we call mark recapture. So a lot of the seals here in the main islands are either flipper tagged or they have markings on them like bleach marks or bite marks. And so we know the individuals. And I think in the catalog of the known animals, there's probably by now somewhere close to 200 known identifiable animals in the main islands. And then there's a bunch on Ni'ihau. And then in the Northwest Islands, in the summer months between May and September, we send these field camp researchers up and we drop them off on these islands and they stay there all summer. And they, throughout the year, determine which seals they have and produce a number. And then that comes back in the science center. So I work on the management side of the house and there's a science side of the house. Those guys all sit in a room and they scrub the numbers and then they put the final number into what we call our stock assessment report. So if you look on the NOAA website under stock assessment report, you can get the numbers for marine mammals all across the country. So monk seals here, harbor seals on the East Coast, humpback whales in Alaska, blue whales off of California. You can get that all from the stock assessment report, NOAA stock assessment report.
I've heard from last week's talk that there's monk seals in like a zoo in Minnesota or someplace.
Uh-huh.
Where else are they found as far as what zoos and what marine parks have monks that are Hawaiian monk seals?
There's the zoo in Minnesota that got the animals that were non-releasable years ago from SeaWorld that initially went to San Antonio. There's Sea Life Park has a monk seal. There is the Waikiki Aquarium. And then there's currently a seal named KE18 that he has a Hawaiian name, but it escapes me. Sorry, I'm the scientists. We try to use the numbers. We try not to name them. So KE18 was a seal that was mobbing females and killing baby seals up in the Northwest Islands. And so we flew him to California to the UC Santa Cruz, and he's currently been involved in a 4-year metabolism study so that we understand dive behavior and dive physiology of these seals. Also doing, most recently, they've been doing hearing tests on him to see what range the seals hear in, kind of like we're concerned with marine cetaceans and Navy sonar and seismic activities and things like that. And we know in some cases, the range that these cetaceans or dolphins and whales hear, we don't have that information on seals. So this seal is contributing to that. So talk about a bad actor. This seal was really a bad actor, but not human related. It was kind of natural mobbing behavior. And so he has been put to a good use for conservation research. And then when the research is done, he will eventually come back to Hawaii and will reside somewhere, Sea Life Park, Waikiki Aquarium.
Yes. Do you have any intervention plan for RH32? And if not, is there a threshold of bad behavior that we can reach?
Yeah, our intervention plan right now is we've been spending a lot of time talking about this. And if you look kind of on a continuum, if you have like wild Northwest Hawaiian Island seals here, and you have like O42 and KP2 over here, like the most conditioned seals that we've had. RH32 kind of is obviously over towards the habituated and conditioned, but he's not the worst actor that we've seen. He's not solely relying on fish from fishermen for food. There could be things he's doing that would be a lot more concerning to his health. Of course, we don't like the situation that we have, but for right now, our intervention is to work with the fishermen and to encourage them to pull their lines out of the water, to not feed the fish. So a couple of times we've been there and the seal has come by and ripped off a fish off the fish hook, and the fisherman's left with half a fish. Fishermen will take that and then throw the rest of them. We're like, don't do that. So please don't do that. So we're trying to, work with the fishermen, and they're being everybody's being really cool and very compliant, and there's a good working relationship there. So we're hoping that we can foster a system of kind of not so great but acceptable coexistence. Like we can live with this, but we still got to do more work. So I think we're moving towards that, because really, some things that we've learned from these other seals, and I know I got to wrap it up here soon, is that moving them to another location doesn't do squat. I mean, no matter where we take RH32 at this point, he's going to find some problem somewhere else. And the other thing is you're taking a problem from one person's backyard that knows about it, and you're sticking it in somebody else's backyard. And we don't want to do that either. So we've learned that as well. So we're trying to get to a tolerable coexistence situation. And I think we're kind of headed in that direction. Am I allowed to answer another question? Okay.
It sounds like in the past there was a lot of cultural back on kind of headbutting going on.
Yeah.
Do you still find out that today, after all these incidents happens with seals, it's still an issue? That's why outreach is being done.
Well, you raise a really good topic, and I could probably come back and do another night on that whole thing. Maybe I'll be invited back to do that. But we have a situation right now, for example, where some people are accepting the monk seals. Like on the Big Island, we had a death of 2 different seals. So a very well-known seal that died in a aquaculture pen, which is very unfortunate. And then we had a baby, a pup that was rolled over by its mom, and it died. And some Hawaiian cultural practitioners had requested the remains back. So we were able to provide the cremated remains of those seals and give them back to them. And I was there to attend the ceremony, and there's a lot of positive movement forward in acknowledging those seals, as in the local belief system, they call it kanaloa. However, you go to the Molokai, and people are intentionally killing monk seals. So the message of them being a sacred being that should be respected is still not universal across the islands. And so we're working with community members on Molokai who have said to us, hey, you know what, feds, Haole feds, don't come over and tell us how to manage the monk seals. Let us figure it out. Let us manage the situation on our own. And so we're trying to reinforce that. We're trying to, what information can we provide to you so that you can educate within community. But, and then, you probably heard on Kauai, maybe, I guess it's 2 years ago now, there was that guy who was punching the monk seal and got 4 years in jail. And so, it's one of those things that we're gaining ground and positive momentum in some areas, and in other areas, they're still not being accepted. And so and again, that goes beyond NOAA. That's something that has to be, within family, within community. And we're here to provide the facts, but we need help in changing the behavior or perception.
Whatever, if any, is NOAA doing to work with Hawaii Tourism Board? Because I end up getting called for Rocky a lot, right, Rocky Key. And I get a lot of tourists who give me a lot of pushback when I encourage them to respectfully view her.
Mm-hmm.
I got people that are laying down next to her, that kind of thing, and people that want to touch her, and all that, I'm getting all the tourists all the time.
Sure.
And somebody actually made a suggestion. Can you guys work with the Hawaii Tourism Board? I mean, everybody's got to get here on a plane.
Yeah.
Maybe show a video.
Yeah, there's been many attempts to show videos on the airplanes, and that has, when there was finally a video that was accepted to be on a flight coming over, it was only one airline, and we kind of found that people don't pay attention to it. It's usually shown when the plane is landing and people are like putting on their sweatshirt and getting out their sunblock and they're in Hawaii and they're drinking their last part of their Mai Tai and not really paying attention. And so the whole thing about showing a video on a plane flight has been discussed ad nauseum. And at one point in time, we even engaged the Hawaii University of Hawaii Law School, and we had students working on it. And again, like I said, we did get a video on, but it didn't seem to show much of a change in behavior. As far as reaching out to HTA, I know in the past people have reached out to the individual tour companies that, as the bus rolls up and people are getting dropped off on the seal, say up by Kualoa Ranch, that we in the past have called that tour company and said, hey, look, you can't just drop your people off at the seal there. But it's got to be an ongoing effort because it seems like bus drivers will change, managers will change. And so you're with HMAR?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's something that I would definitely push back uphill to John Gelman and be like, hey, we got to, as the organization, that's the front lines, the boots on the ground for monk seal conservation. It's going to be a constant job for you guys to continue to do the outreach with the tour companies. Yeah, we can support as well, but it's just such a fluid thing. It's almost like you can try to keep up with it, but it's sometimes almost impossible to keep up with it.
Yeah, I got the same thing from a volunteer who does Hanauma. And she was like saying, I don't know what to do with these terrorists, they want to ride the turtle. It's the same, we're running into the same thing for seal and turtle.
We can't make people bring their brains with them on vacation.
Yeah.
There's no agency that can do that, unfortunately.
I'm on a beach last week with Rocky, and a guy comes up, he's a 10 tall. He wants to go close, and he says, she knows me. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, can't really compete with that. You can do, as volunteers and members of the public, we could just do our best to give the facts out in a non-confrontational and polite way, which I know you guys do. But you just have to walk away sometimes and say, I tried.
Yeah.